Hey, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So arguably the most controversial list that I make all season is when I drop my updated top 10 most overrated players in the NHL list. And rightfully so. Fans of a certain player come out and they just absolutely slaughter me, think that I'm an absolute idiot because you want to defend your favorite players, and I understand. But today we're going to do a little bit of a mix of overrated, underrated. I'm not just going to regurgitate my top 10. I'm going to give you one overrated player, then one underrated player. Some of the most underrated and overrated players that I think in the NHL as of right now. I haven't formulated my full top 10 overrated and underrated, but I just wanted to give four guys. And when looking at the overrated list, it's going to be some guys. Three of the guys that I'm going to give out today are older guys that still have a high reputation that I'm not sure they deserve all the praise that they get. Another guy that's in their mid-20s that I think is a little bit overrated. And when looking at the underrated guys, my actual top 10 is probably going to be a lot more like lesser known guys, but I decided to make it a little bit more mainstream for this. These are some guys that everybody probably thinks are good players, but I think that they are very good to even elite level players. So without further ado, we're going to dive into it. And up first, I have Victor Hedman. Now, Hedman is still for sure a very good offensive defenseman. He's been over 70-point pace the last 3 seasons. There's no denying that he has a high offensive ceiling, but I think that because of his reputation from around 2017 to as late as 2022, he was still a very good defensive defenseman. That reputation has carried the last 2 seasons, despite him having objectively bad defensive numbers. When looking at him last year, he was in the bottom 3% of even strength defense analytics, and this year he improved to the bottom 5% instead of 3% in even strength defense. So he's basically like what people say that Erik Carlson is, and Erik Carlson is bad defensively, don't get me wrong, but he's basically Erik Carlson now. He is very, very good offensively, but at this point, he does not defend at the same level, and as a result, I agree, he's still a number 1 defenseman, but he is definitely not a top 5 guy like I see some people have, citing his playoff experience and all that stuff, and how he's still good defensively. Not the case. He's not top 5, he's not top 10 in my opinion. He's probably somewhere between the range of 13 to 20. I know that might sound harsh, but I think when you look at a guy, last year I kind of wrote it off as like he's going to bounce back. He's not actually shit defensively. He's going to be fine. Everybody can have one down season, but now that we have had back-to-back not even below average, horrible defensive seasons from Victor Hedman, I got to ding him, and as a result, I think that he is extremely overrated because old heads still have him as a top 10 defenseman, no doubt. The first underrated player that I wanted to highlight, I wanted to shout out a Swede in a positive light, and that is William Carlson. Did you know that this guy had 30 goals, 30 assists for 60 points in 70 games this season, on top of getting a shit ton of Selke votes, and rightfully so. Basically, since this guy has arrived in Vegas, he has been Selke level, top 15 percentile, even strength defense in the entire league, as well as killing penalties. And yet again, he had a very good offensive season. He hadn't really had he's been like a solid like 50 to 60 point guy. But again, 30 and for 60 in 70 games is so goddamn impressive. And I think next year he's setting up to have another extremely productive year, considering the fact they lost Chandler Stevenson, and Jack Eichel is like bound for the 15 to 20 game injury every single season. William Carlson is really going to have to carry the load, and I think people will be reminded, like back in 2018 during that inaugural season where he had 43 goddamn goals, just how good William Carlson is. Next up, I think Filip Hronek is a little bit overrated. When looking at the start of his season, 36 points in 42 games. He was amazing offensively for the Vancouver Canucks, but he got hit pretty hard by the PDO. Some of their other guys were able to maintain that point pace. He only had 12 points in his final 39 games. Defensive metrics also slipped up a little bit, and when looking at him in the playoffs, only 1 goal, 1 assist for 2 points in 13 games. So I think a lot of people are still very high on him because of that start of the season. I think his contract's fine. He's making like mid-7s, and he's 26 years old. He's an okay top pairing guy, but I've seen some people put him as like a top 25 defenseman in the NHL. I don't really think that's the case. I think it was definitely more Quinn Hughes really helping him out in that top pair versus him being a legit 1B to Quinn Hughes. I think that he's around a top 35 to 50 defenseman in the NHL, but I definitely think because of that scorching hot start, he has gotten overhyped a little bit by some people, by the Canadian media. Again, a good player, but I think after the start last year, people still have that fresh in their minds, and they think think that he is a legit, very good, would be a number one on other teams. He was a number one on Detroit, but they fucking sucked. So as a result, I think Philip Hronek is a little bit overrated right now. Actually overrated by a decent amount. And I think next season, we're not going to see a 48-point total, as well as maybe his defensive metrics not quite being as impressive. Next up, Marcus Pettersson of the Pittsburgh Penguins. 30 even strength points this year, which ranked 28th out of all defensemen in the NHL. He was tied with Rasmus Anderson, had more even strength production than Vince Dunn, Shane Gottisbehere, Sean Durzi. Just an elite two-way guy. When looking at him with Erik Karlsson he wasn't like great defensively, but he was way better defensively than his last like 5 seasons. Pettersson was the reason for that. Pettersson has been posting back-to-back seasons of being in like the top 20 percentile in even strength offense and defense. And when looking at his splits, Pettersson's splits, I'll throw them up on the screen right now with Letang and Carlson on that left side with those guys versus those two playing with Ryan Graves. It is a pretty sizable difference in terms of Pettersson. And I know Graves wasn't that good in his own right, but it's more so Pettersson also just being that good of a guy. He would be a top pair defenseman on a lot of teams in the NHL. A lot of playoff teams in the NHL would look for guys like Marcus Pettersson to be in their top 4. He's very underrated right now. Played around 23 minutes last year for the Pittsburgh Penguins and put up fantastic results for them. So as a result, I think he is one of the most underrated defensemen in the entire NHL as of right now. Overrated, this might surprise some people, but I'm going to go with Jacob Markstrom. And you might be saying, Mike, you had him as your number 11 goaltender in the entire NHL. And that is true. I had that, like a month, 3 weeks ago at this point. But I think that's more of a testament of how shitty most teams have with their goaltending situation than really a testament to Markstrom. I think Markstrom is a decent tier away from those top 10 guys, because when looking at it, I feel like I was taking crazy pills when the Devils traded for him and they acted like it was a slam dunk that they got this surefire stud. When you look at Markstrom's track record over the last 4 years, it has been wildly inconsistent. In 2024, he was pretty good. He had 13.7 goals saved above expected, ranked 7th out of 46 goaltenders that played at least 30 games. In 2023, though, he was pretty bad. Negative 3.1 goals saved above expected, ranked 28th out of 42 goalies. 2022, he was the Vezina runner-up. He shouldn't have been close to that. The advanced stats showed that it was more so the Calgary Flames just being a wagon of a team, having a fantastic defense core, then Markstrom being this great goaltender. He had a 922, but he ranked 12th out of 44 goaltenders and goals saved above expected at only 10.8. And then in 2021, he was objectively bad. He had minus 9.3 goals saved above expected, which ranked 40th out of 53 goaltenders. So when looking at him, again, I think he's closer. He's in the tier of like a Stuart Skinner and Tristan Jarry, then say that 8 through 10 of Bobrovsky, Ullmark, and Jake Ottinger. I think Ullmark's a sure thing when looking at his track record even before the Boston Bruins. Markstrom's 34 years old. Markstrom could easily blow up in the Devils' face. I know they're only paying him, $4.1 million. I'm a lot lower on Jacob Markstrom than others heading into the season. So as a result, I think that he is just a little bit underrated heading into next season. Underrated or overrated. Markstrom's overrated. Underrated, though, is Zach Werenski. I've glazed this guy nonstop multiple times, but when looking at him, 57 points in 70 games last year for the Columbus Blue Jackets, and as a result, he's like a top 10 goal. He's a top 10 defenseman for me. Around like 8 through 12, I think Werenski deserves to be talked about in that range when looking at what he's done in Columbus. In goddamn Columbus, he has been so impressive, but despite that, I constantly see him outside of guys' top 15 goaltenders. Zach Werenski is a better defenseman than Victor Hedman. I will scream that until I'm blue in the face, and as a result, I think that he is very underrated. In terms of a guy that is overrated, Steven Stamkos. 40 goals, 41 assists, 81 points. That's pretty impressive. That was tied for the 15th most goals in the NHL, as well as the 26th most points. But when you look at those even strength numbers for Steven Stamkos, it starts to not look that good. He was 43rd in even strength goals with only 21, tied with Evander Kane and Brandon Saad. He was tied for the 87th most even strength points at 42. He had the highest percentage of points to come from the power play out of his total amount of points, power play points divided by overall points. He had the highest percentage among any player that had more than 65 points last season. And he was never really like Selke level defense, but his defense has been on the decline to the point that he's in like the bottom fifth of the entire NHL in even strength defense. So when looking at Steven Stamkos, I still think that he can be a very good second liner for the Nashville Predators, but I think they did overpay a decent amount at $8 million. Maybe next year he can be worth $8 million, but I don't think that it's this massive ad that people are hyping up to be. This isn't Steven Stamkos 3 to 4 years ago when he put up like 106 points and still had it. Steven Stamkos is on his way down, and I don't think that the Nashville Predators power play is going to be able to replicate what Nikita Kucherov, Braden Point, and Victor Hedman brought. Well, actually, Yossi is better than Hedman, but you get what I mean. The power play is not going to be as good. It's not going to be the best in the league by like 2%, by 2% like the Tampa Bay Lightning last year. So as a result, I think Steven Stamkos is severely overrated right now. And then lastly, our last underrated. This might be a little bit biased, but I have Brock Nelson. Now, quiz. I'm going to quiz you right now. What do you think Brock Nelson's stat line was last year? Write it down. I'm paying attention. You probably said like 30 and 30. He had 34 goals, 35 assists for 69 points. The last 3 seasons, he has been on average for 37 goals, 34 assists, 71 points, playing that second line center role with wingers just being rotated in and out like Pierre Engvall, Kyle Palmieri. He got Kyle Palmieri to 30 goals this season. Josh Bailey for a couple seasons playing with. Zach Parise. The fact he has been so productive, around 35 and 35, as well as solid defensive numbers, despite not having that much talent, despite having Lane Lambert as his coach, has been so impressive. I still think that he is very underrated, even after posting yet another 35 and 35 season, 35 and 34 season. Not enough people are talking about Brock Nelson. I think that you can make an argument that he's a top 75 player in the entire NHL. Wasn't going to crack my top 50. I feel like that'd be biased. He's definitely a top 100 player, maybe even top 75. But despite that, I see him get no love. Matt Barzal or even Bo Horvat get some love. I think Brock Nelson's just as good as Bo Horvat, in my opinion. If I move Bo Horvat up to that first line, you would see Brock Nelson's point totals increase. But Brock Nelson's a stud, and you really only see them talking about Barzal, Horvat, and Dobson. More people need to talk about Brock Nelson, but that's my overrated, underrated. Let me know in the comments. What do you think? Am I absolutely out of control for thinking that Victor Hedman's overrated? Is Brock Nelson actually overrated instead of underrated? I'll be seeing the next one.